Hello there, and welcome to the Sleep with Science channel, where tonight, we are going to take you somewhere so vast, so breathtakingly still, so impossibly quiet, that the very concept of distance will begin to lose all meaning, and you will find yourself floating gently in a place that has no floor, no ceiling, no walls, and no edges, only the soft, endless dark that stretches out in every direction, farther than any thought you have ever had, farther than any dream you have ever drifted into, farther than light itself has traveled in the entire lifetime of everything that has ever existed. So let your body settle now. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. Let your hands rest exactly where they are, heavy and warm, and let your breath come slow and easy, because where we are going tonight requires nothing from you except your willingness to simply let go. Close your eyes if you haven't already, and breathe, because what we are about to explore together is not a place you can find on any map. It is not a destination with coordinates. It is something far more profound, far more ancient, and in the most beautiful way imaginable, far more personal than you might expect. Tonight, we are going to ask one of the most quietly staggering questions that science has ever dared to sit with, a question so simple on the surface that a child could ask it, and yet so deep at its core that entire lifetimes of human curiosity have barely begun to trace its edges. Why is most of the universe made of nothing at all? Not something, not stars, not galaxies, not gas clouds glowing with the soft rose and amber light of newborn suns, not the dark silhouettes of moons drifting in slow, patient orbits around planets that have never been touched by human hands. Not even the faint, invisible threads of gravity that stitch all of those things together across distances so enormous they dissolve language entirely. No. Most of the universe, the overwhelming, almost incomprehensible majority of it, is simply empty. And tonight, we are going to drift through that emptiness together, slowly, the way a single breath of warm air drifts upward on a perfectly still summer evening, rising without effort, without destination, without any urgency at all. Picture yourself right now lying somewhere comfortable. The weight of your body is real and solid, pressing gently into the surface beneath you. Your heartbeat is there, quiet and steady, a small, faithful rhythm that has been keeping time for you every moment of your life without ever asking for your attention. Feel it now if you like. That gentle pulse. That soft, living drumbeat somewhere deep in the center of your chest. That heartbeat, that warmth, that weight. All of it is made of atoms. Billions upon billions of atoms, arranged in arrangements so intricate and so precise that scientists have spent centuries trying to fully understand them, and still, they marvel. You are made of carbon and oxygen and hydrogen and calcium and iron forged in the hearts of stars that exploded long before our sun had even begun to form. You are, in the most literal and scientifically accurate sense of the words, made of stardust. And yet, and here is where the silence begins to open up around us like the sky opening up after rain. Even those atoms, those ancient stellar atoms that make up every cell of your body, are themselves almost entirely empty. An atom, if you have never really sat with this idea before, is mostly nothing. At its center is a nucleus, a tiny, dense, almost impossibly small core where the protons and neutrons are packed together, and around that nucleus, at a distance so proportionally vast it barely makes sense to describe it, electrons exist in a kind of shimmering, probabilistic haze. If the nucleus of a hydrogen atom were the size of a marble placed in the center of a football field, the electron would be somewhere near the outermost bleachers. Everything in between, all of that space, all of that enormous emptiness, is exactly that. Empty. Which means that you, lying there in the comfortable dark, are mostly nothing. The chair beneath you, or the mattress, or the soft pile of blankets, mostly nothing. The walls around you, the air you are breathing, the earth itself, spinning slowly beneath you at roughly 1,000 miles per hour at the equator, though you cannot feel it, though it makes no sound, though it asks nothing of you. All of it, at its most fundamental and honest level, is almost entirely empty space with just a whisper of matter clinging to structure by forces we are still learning to fully name. And if that is true of solid, tangible, touchable things, if a rock or a bone or a drop of water is nearly hollow at its core, then imagine what awaits us when we zoom out. When we pull back, slowly, the way a camera slowly widens its frame to reveal not just the face but the room, not just the room but the building, not just the building but the city, not just the city but the continent, not just the continent but the pale blue sphere of our world hanging in the dark, and then farther still, until even our world becomes a speck, a mote of pale light lost in the sweeping arm of a galaxy so wide that light itself, traveling at 186,000 miles per second, takes 100,000 years just to cross from one side to the other. Our galaxy, the Milky Way, a spiral of approximately 400 billion stars, each one a sun, each one burning with its own particular fury and grace, scattered across a disk of space so immense that the numbers required to describe it stop feeling like numbers at all and begin to feel more like poetry, more like a kind of sacred shorthand for something the human mind was never quite built to hold in its entirety, and yet keeps reaching for, again and again, the way the eye keeps drifting upward toward the night sky. Even when we tell ourselves we are too busy, even when the lights of our cities have dimmed the stars to almost nothing, because something in us remembers, something older than language and older than sleep itself knows that we came from out there, and that out there is where the truest quiet lives. And even within that galaxy, even within those 400 billion stars and all the planets orbiting them and all the moons orbiting those planets and all the comets and asteroids and clouds of interstellar dust drifting in the spaces between, even within all of that, the emptiness dominates. Stars, for all their brilliance, for all the light they pour out into the dark like lanterns hung in an infinite hall, are extraordinarily lonely things. The nearest star to our own sun is called Proxima Centauri. It sits roughly 4.2 light-years away. A light-year, just to let that land gently, is the distance light travels in a single year, and light, moving at that extraordinary speed of 186,000 miles every second without rest, without slowing, without pause, covers approximately 5.9 trillion miles in 1 year. 4.2 times that. That is the distance to just our nearest stellar neighbor. And between our Sun and Proxima Centauri, there is, for all meaningful purposes, nothing. A few stray hydrogen atoms drifting in the cold. A silence so complete that sound, even if it could travel through the vacuum, would have nothing to move through, nothing to carry it, nowhere to go. Let that settle over you like a warm, heavy blanket. The universe is not a crowded place. The universe is, by almost every measure, a vast and extraordinarily peaceful ocean of emptiness, in which islands of matter, stars and galaxies and clusters and filaments, float like foam on the surface of something so much larger that calling it a surface is already misleading. And here is where tonight's question begins to deepen, begins to move from the merely astonishing into something that feels almost personal, almost tender in its strangeness. Because when astronomers and cosmologists and physicists sit down and actually calculate, carefully, methodically, using the best tools and the most rigorous mathematics available, what they find is that the matter we can see and touch and measure, all of it, every star, every planet, every moon, every asteroid, every human body lying warm and breathing in the dark right now across the entire surface of this small blue world, all of the visible, tangible, luminous matter in the entire observable universe accounts for only about 5% of what the universe actually contains. 5%. Which means that 95% of everything that exists is something we cannot see, cannot touch, and only barely understand. That 95% is divided, as best as we currently know, into two profound and mysterious categories. One is called dark matter. The other is called dark energy. And those two names, with their quiet, almost literary simplicity, are in many ways just honest admissions that we have found something enormous and real and undeniable, and we have not yet found the words, or the physics, or the understanding deep enough to tell you exactly what it is. But we will get there. Slowly, gently, the way this night is unfolding around you, one soft breath at a time. For now, simply let the scale of that sink into you without effort, without urgency, the way warmth sinks into a cold hand held near a fire. You do not need to do anything with this information. You do not need to memorize it or analyze it or form any particular conclusion. You only need to feel the gentle, extraordinary weight of it, the way standing at the edge of an ocean at night and looking out at the dark water carries a weight that is not frightening but freeing, because you are reminded without words that the world is so much larger than any worry you are carrying, so much older than any problem that kept you awake last night, so much more patient than any timeline you have placed upon yourself. The universe has been expanding for approximately 13.8 billion years. It was doing so before the first star ever ignited. It will continue doing so long after the last star has cooled and gone dark. And through all of that, through every moment of that incomprehensible span of time, the emptiness has been the constant. The silence has been the foundation. The nothing has been, in the deepest and most surprising sense, the something that holds everything together, the invisible architecture upon which all visible things are arranged. The way silence between notes is not the absence of music, but the very thing that gives music its shape, its meaning, its capacity to move something deep inside you that words alone could never quite reach. And so tonight, as you rest here in the dark, breathing slowly, your body growing heavier and more still with each passing minute, we are going to let that silence be our guide. We are going to let the emptiness of the universe teach us something, not through effort, not through striving, but through the simple, ancient act of paying gentle attention to what is actually there when we stop filling every moment with noise and motion and the relentless forward pressure of ordinary days. Because the universe, in its overwhelming emptiness, is not telling us that nothing matters. It is telling us something far more subtle and far more beautiful than that. It is whispering, in the only language vast enough to carry the message, that the spaces between things are not wasted, that the quiet between heartbeats is not empty, that the pause between one breath and the next is not nothing. It is everything. It is the hinge on which life swings open and closed in its perfect, patient rhythm. Feel that now. The pause at the top of your inhale. The stillness just before your breath releases. That moment, that tiny, weightless moment, is the same quality of stillness that lives between galaxies. The same fundamental quiet that makes up the overwhelming majority of all that exists. You are not separate from the universe. You are a particular arrangement of it, a brief and intricate eddy in a current that has been flowing for nearly 14 billion years, and the emptiness inside you and the emptiness outside you are made of the same patient, ancient dark. Now let your mind drift even further, gently, without forcing it anywhere. Let it float the way starlight floats, in all directions at once, unhurried, unstoppable in its softness. When astronomers first began to seriously map the large-scale structure of the universe, they expected, in some intuitive way, to find matter distributed more or less evenly across the cosmos. Stars here and there, galaxies scattered with some rough uniformity, a kind of cosmic democracy of matter spread across the available space. What they found instead stopped them. What they found instead was so unexpected and so strangely beautiful that it took years, decades even, for the full implication of it to settle into the scientific imagination. What they found was that the universe is structured like an enormous web. A cosmic web. Filaments of matter, vast threads of galaxies and gas and dark matter, stretching across hundreds of millions of light-years, interconnected, laced together in a pattern so intricate and so organic that when you see the images produced by supercomputer simulations of the large-scale universe and place them beside microscopic images of neurons firing in the human brain, the resemblance is so striking, so quietly breathtaking, that the comparison has become one of the most shared and marveled at. Images in all of modern science. The universe looks like a mind thinking. And between the filaments of that cosmic web, between those vast, glowing threads of clustered matter, are the voids. Enormous, almost perfectly empty regions of space that can span hundreds of millions of light-years in diameter, containing almost no galaxies, almost no stars, almost no detectable matter of any kind. Just space. Just the dark. Just the patient, immeasurable nothing that makes up the majority of the universe's volume, the deep and silent sea in which the luminous web of matter floats like the most delicate and intricate lacework you have ever imagined. These voids are not accidents. They are not simply the spaces that matter forgot to fill. They are, cosmologists now understand, as much a part of the structure of the universe as the filaments themselves. They grew, over billions of years, through the same gravitational processes that built the galaxies. Matter was drawn by gravity toward denser regions, and as it gathered into filaments and clusters, the regions it left behind grew emptier and emptier, stretched and hollowed by the slow, inexorable pull of everything toward everything else. The voids breathe, in a sense. They expand. They push outward against the filaments around them, contributing to the large-scale motion of the universe in ways that scientists are still carefully unraveling, one patient observation at a time. And here, floating in the dark, you might feel something like recognition. Because there is something about the structure of the cosmos that mirrors the structure of a resting mind. The bright, active nodes of thought connected by threads of association, and between them, the wide, open spaces of non-thinking, of pure restful awareness, the voids of the mind that are not empty in any negative sense but are instead the necessary counterpart to all that brightness, the deep ground from which every thought arises and into which every thought eventually dissolves. You do not need to hold on to every thought tonight. You do not need to follow every thread to its conclusion or keep every light burning. The voids inside you are safe. The quiet regions of your mind, the ones that are not busy, not producing, not reaching for the next thing, those places are not failures of attention. They are not gaps to be filled or silences to be covered over with sound and distraction and the busy, restless energy of a mind that has forgotten how to simply be still. They are, in the most precise and literal sense, the architecture of rest. They are the cosmic voids of your inner universe, and they are exactly as vast and exactly as necessary and exactly as filled with quiet purpose as the great empty regions that stretch between the galaxy filaments of the actual universe spinning slowly and silently around you right now, at this very moment, as you lie here breathing, as your body continues its ancient, automatic work of keeping you alive without asking anything of your conscious mind at all. Your heart is beating. Your lungs are moving. Your cells are doing 10,000 things simultaneously that you will never need to understand or direct or even be aware of. The body knows. It has always known. It learned these things in the deep time before you were born, encoded in the same molecular language that connects you to every living thing that has ever drawn breath on this small, improbable world, and that molecular language itself was written in the furnaces of stars that burned out billions of years before the Earth even existed. You are, in every possible sense, ancient. And the universe that holds you is ancient beyond any scale your waking mind could comfortably contain, which is perhaps why these late, quiet hours are the best time to approach it, when the waking mind has loosened its grip on the ordinary and the extraordinary becomes, for a little while, simply the texture of the dark around you. Now let us drift a little deeper into the question that brought us here tonight, the question about why the universe is made mostly of nothing, because there is a layer beneath the cosmic web and the voids and the vast, elegant emptiness between stars that goes deeper still, that moves from the astronomically large into the unimaginably small, and in doing so completes a kind of circle that is one of the most quietly astonishing things that modern science has ever drawn. We touched on it earlier, lightly, like a finger brushing the surface of still water. The emptiness inside atoms. But let us go there more fully now, slowly, the way you might lower yourself into warm water, unhurried, aware of every sensation, present to the gradual enveloping of something that is larger than you and older than you and has been waiting here patiently since long before you arrived. Every atom in your body has a nucleus. That nucleus is extraordinarily small. If you were to take a single atom and expand it to the size of a cathedral, the nucleus at its center would be roughly the size of a grain of sand on the floor of that cathedral. A single grain of sand in the vast, echoing interior of a great stone building. And the electrons, those tiny particles that define the outer boundary of the atom and make the chemistry of life possible, those would be somewhere near the walls, whirring and shimmering in their quantum haze, present and not present simultaneously in the way that only things at the quantum scale are allowed to be, occupying not fixed positions but clouds of probability, regions of likelihood, ghostly suggestions of location that collapse into something definite only when observed, and spring back into beautiful ambiguity the moment attention moves elsewhere. Everything in between, all of that space between the nucleus and the electrons in that vast cathedral of an atom, is empty. Not empty in the way a room is empty when the furniture has been removed. Empty in a much more fundamental and startling sense. Empty in the way that only the quantum vacuum can be empty, which is to say, not quite empty at all, because even the vacuum of space at the quantum level is not truly nothing. It seethes. It fluctuates. It is alive, in a sense, with what physicists call virtual particles, pairs of matter and antimatter that flicker into existence from pure energy and annihilate each other almost instantaneously, so quickly that they skirt the edge of what is detectable, what is real, what is allowed by the strange and beautiful rules that govern the behavior of everything at the smallest scales. The vacuum is not nothing. The vacuum is a kind of restless, creative, endlessly generative something that we call nothing only because we have not yet found a better word for what it actually is. And here, perhaps, is where the question we began with starts to open up in a new direction, starts to reveal a depth beneath its depth, the way certain still pools in dark forests turn out, when you lean over them and let your eyes adjust, to be far deeper than the surface suggested, their bottoms lost in a green and shadowed distance that makes you catch your breath not with fear but with wonder, with a particular quality of awe that comes not from what is large and loud and obvious but from what is quietly, unexpectedly, almost secretly profound. The universe is made mostly of nothing, and yet that nothing, at every scale from the quantum to the cosmic, turns out upon closer inspection to be doing something, to be structured, to be active, to be, in ways we are only beginning to map, a fundamental and creative participant in the story of everything that exists. And so we return, as we must, to that word, nothing. We have been circling it the way planets circle distant suns, drawn by its gravity, never quite arriving at its surface, never quite able to land. Because the closer we come, the more we discover that nothing is not a simple thing. It is not a blank. It is not an absence in the way a missing piece is absent from a puzzle. It is something stranger than that. Something older. Something that the universe itself seems to regard not as a problem to be solved or a gap to be filled, but as a condition. A context. The medium through which everything moves. Consider the electron. If you have never stopped to wonder at the electron, now is the time. It is one of the fundamental constituents of all matter, one of the building blocks of every atom that has ever formed a molecule, a cell, a mountain, a cloud, a living mind. And yet the electron has no size. Not a very small size. No size at all. It is, as far as our most precise instruments have ever been able to determine, a point particle, dimensionless, occupying no space in the way you might imagine a marble occupying space. And still it has mass. Still it has charge. Still it interacts with the world in ways that shape everything from the chemistry of life to the light of stars. Here is a thing that is, in some meaningful sense, nothing, and yet does everything. The atom around which that electron moves is not much more reassuring in its solidity. You know this already, perhaps, in the abstract, the way one knows things that have been told many times but never quite felt. The nucleus of an atom, where almost all of its mass resides, is roughly 100,000 times smaller than the atom itself. If the atom were the size of a cathedral, the nucleus would be a grain of salt left somewhere on the floor, and the electrons would be flickers of light moving somewhere near the walls, and everything between them would be empty. Not approximately empty. Genuinely, precisely, staggeringly empty. The matter that makes up your hand, the matter that makes up this moment, the matter that constitutes the entirety of the visible universe, is overwhelmingly made of space between things. The stuff of reality is mostly the intervals between the stuff of reality. And yet here is what the mind struggles to hold: that emptiness is not passive. It is not waiting. Down at the scale where quantum mechanics speaks, the vacuum between particles is alive with fluctuation. Virtual particles flicker into existence and dissolve again in intervals of time so brief they exist almost in the margins of what time means. The Casimir effect, measured in laboratories with real instruments, with real metallic plates placed nanometers apart, demonstrates that this quantum emptiness exerts pressure, that the void pushes, that nothing, calibrated precisely, produces a measurable force between two surfaces sitting in a vacuum. This is not metaphor. This is experiment. The nothing does something. And if you pull back from the quantum scale, out through the atom and the molecule and the cell and the body and the city and the atmosphere, out past the moon hanging silver and patient in its monthly arc, past the sun spending itself in ancient fusion, out through the solar system's long silence where the planets move in their enormous ellipses with hundreds of millions of miles of nothing between them, and then further still, into interstellar space, where the nearest star to our own sits 4 light-years distant, which is to say 25 trillion miles of almost perfect vacuum, you find that the emptiness only deepens. The Milky Way, our galaxy, is a structure roughly 100,000 light-years across. Within it, hundreds of billions of stars. And yet, if you were to calculate the average density of matter inside this galaxy, the number would stagger you with its smallness. A few hydrogen atoms per cubic centimeter in the densest regions of interstellar space. In others, far fewer. The galaxy, seen from this angle, is almost entirely a void through which stars are scattered the way rare seeds are scattered on an enormous, darkened field. And then beyond the galaxy, intergalactic space. The corridors between the structures. Here the density of matter falls to almost nothing at all. Vast stretches, millions of light-years across, where there are no stars, no galaxies, no clouds of gas or dust, no planets, no light worth speaking of. Just space. Just the dark. Just the metric of existence with nothing, or nearly nothing, inside it. These are the cosmic voids, the great hollows in the large-scale structure of the universe, and they are not rare. They constitute the majority of the universe's volume. The cosmos is, at its largest scales, mostly made of its own absences. And yet even here, even in these regions of almost inconceivable emptiness, dark energy persists. That strange, unnamed pressure that is not matter and not radiation but is nevertheless real, nevertheless measurable in its effects, nevertheless responsible for the fact that the universe is not contracting under its own gravity but expanding, and accelerating in that expansion, the galaxies retreating from one another at speeds that increase with distance. Space itself stretching in all directions as though pulled gently but persistently from every point at once. Dark energy fills the voids. Dark energy fills everything. It is the dominant ingredient of the universe by far, comprising roughly 68% of all that the cosmos contains, and we do not know what it is. And that unknowing is itself a kind of profound thing, a kind of gift the universe offers to those willing to sit with it long enough. We live in an age that has mapped the cosmic microwave background radiation, the faint echo of the universe's earliest light, with extraordinary precision. We have detected gravitational waves, ripples in the fabric of spacetime itself, produced by colliding black holes a billion light-years away. We have imaged the shadow of a supermassive black hole at the center of a distant galaxy, a thing that bends light and swallows time and exists at the edge of what our physics can describe. We have done all of this, and still dark energy remains unnamed in any deeper sense, still categorized by what it does rather than what it is, the way you might describe a wind by the way it moves the leaves without ever knowing where the wind comes from or where it goes when the trees are still. The cosmological constant is what some call it, a term that Einstein himself introduced into his equations and then removed, and then reality reintroduced on his behalf, because the universe turned out to require it after all. It is a number, a pressure, a property of space itself, perhaps, a tendency of the vacuum to resist collapse, to push outward with a force that does not dilute as space expands because it does not belong to matter, does not travel with matter, but belongs instead to the space between matter, to the emptiness itself, growing as the emptiness grows, patient and inexhaustible and deeply, permanently strange. Some physicists speak of it as vacuum energy, the ground-state energy of all quantum fields, the irreducible hum of existence at its most fundamental level. In this picture, even the most perfect vacuum, the most thoroughly emptied region of space that could ever theoretically exist, would still contain energy, would still be something, would still possess a kind of restlessness that prevents it from ever becoming truly, finally, absolutely nothing. The void vibrates, the darkness hums, and the universe, balanced on this hum, expands. There is a number that haunts the edges of this conversation, a discrepancy so extreme it has been called the worst prediction in the history of physics, which is a remarkable thing to say about a field that has otherwise achieved extraordinary precision. When theorists calculate what the vacuum energy should be, based on quantum field theory, and then compare that calculation to the observed value of dark energy inferred from cosmological measurements, the two numbers disagree. Not slightly. Not by a factor of 10, or 100, or 1,000,000. They disagree by somewhere in the range of 10 to the power of 120. A 1 followed by 120 zeros. This mismatch sits at the center of modern physics like a splinter that cannot be removed, a reminder that our two greatest theories of reality, quantum mechanics and general relativity, though each staggeringly successful in its own domain, have not yet been reconciled into a single coherent picture of the universe. The nothing at the heart of things is still, after all our centuries of looking, not fully understood. And there is something in that incompleteness that feels appropriate, somehow. Not discouraging, not a failure, but appropriate, in the way that the horizon is appropriate to a long walk. It recedes not because the world is cruel, but because the world is large. Because there is always more of it than you have reached. Because depth, genuine depth, does not exhaust itself. The universe has been generous enough to be inexhaustible, and the void at its center is perhaps the most inexhaustible thing of all. Think for a moment about what it means that space itself can have energy. Not space containing something that has energy. Space. The emptiness. The between. We are so accustomed to thinking of energy as a property of things, of particles, of radiation, of motion, that the idea of energy belonging to nothing, to pure geometric extension, to the mere fact of distance between points, requires a kind of mental softening, a willingness to let the ordinary categories loosen their grip. What is space, really, that it can possess a property? What is the vacuum that it can push? These questions reach down into the foundations of our understanding and find, not bedrock, but more depth, more uncertainty, more beautiful and unsettling openness. The large-scale structure of the universe reflects all of this in its architecture. Those cosmic voids we spoke of, those vast hollows between the galaxy filaments and clusters, are not featureless. They are not simply nothing shaped into spheres. They have boundaries, gradients, subtle flows of matter along their edges. Galaxies tend to be found not inside them but strung along their surfaces, the way foam collects along the shore of a wave. The voids are, in a real sense, responsible for the structure of the visible universe. The emptiness organized the fullness. The nothing shaped the something. The great hollows in the cosmic web pushed matter outward as they grew, the way a bubble rising through water displaces the water around it, and it was in those displaced regions, those compressed filaments and walls and nodes, that galaxies formed, that stars ignited, that the conditions for worlds and water and wondering minds eventually arose. And so the voids did not merely happen alongside the story of the universe. They were part of its telling. They were, in some sense, the negative space out of which the visible cosmos was carved, the way a sculptor does not only add but removes, does not only build but hollows, and the hollowing is not incidental but essential, not the leftover but the method. The universe sculpted itself from both directions at once, gathering here, emptying there, and the result is what we see when we look outward with our deepest instruments. A web, a lace, a filament structure of almost incomprehensible scale and delicacy, billions of light years across, ancient beyond the reach of ordinary imagination, and still in motion, still evolving, still breathing in the slow and cosmic sense of that word. The cosmic web. Let that phrase settle for a moment. It is not metaphor, or not only metaphor. It is the actual name that cosmologists give to the large-scale structure of the universe, and it earns that name. When simulations are run on the most powerful computers we have built, simulations that attempt to model the gravitational behavior of dark matter and ordinary matter across billions of years of cosmic time, what emerges is always the same thing. Filaments. Sheets. Nodes where filaments intersect, dense and bright with galaxies. And between them, the voids. The pattern repeats at scale after scale, self-similar in the way that certain natural structures are self-similar, the way a coastline looks roughly the same whether you view it from a mile above or 100 feet above, the way a river delta from the air resembles the branching of a tree, the branching of a nerve, the branching of lightning finding its way to the ground. There is a name for this kind of structure. Fractal, or fractal-like. A geometry of repetition, of pattern within pattern, of detail that does not diminish as you approach but only changes its register, offers a different version of the same essential form. And the universe, which did not consult any human mathematician before arranging itself, arrived at something like this independently, because gravity is patient and consistent and works the same way at every scale, pulling matter along the same kinds of trajectories whether the matter in question is a dust grain or a galaxy cluster, accumulating structure through the same logic of attraction and time. But underneath the visible web, underneath the filaments of ordinary matter that we can observe with our telescopes and our radio arrays and our X-ray satellites, there is another structure, darker and larger and in some ways more fundamental. Dark matter, which does not emit light, does not reflect light, does not interact with light at all in any way we have yet detected, nonetheless has gravity. It pulls. It accumulates. And it was dark matter that built the first scaffolding of the cosmic web, the invisible skeleton upon which ordinary matter eventually settled, the way moss settles on stone it did not create. The dark matter halos around galaxies, the dark matter filaments connecting galaxy clusters, the dark matter distribution throughout the universe, these are the underlying architecture. The stars and gas and dust we see are, in this sense, decoration. Luminous traces on a dark and structural foundation we cannot directly see but cannot deny. And here again we encounter nothing, or something so close to nothing in our experience of it that the distinction requires careful handling. Dark matter does not shine. It does not speak to our instruments in the language of light. It reveals itself only through absence, through the way galaxies rotate faster than visible matter alone could account for, through the way galaxy clusters bend the light of more distant objects by more than their visible mass could explain, through the way the cosmic web itself has the shape it does. We infer dark matter the way you might infer a current in a dark river, not by seeing the water move, but by watching the surface of things caught in it drift in ways that still air would not produce. The evidence is overwhelming. The substance is unknown. 5%. That is the portion of the universe made of the ordinary matter we have studied and named and built our science upon. The atoms, the molecules, the stars, the planets, the oceans, the living things, the entire catalog of everything that has ever been touched or seen or tasted or measured in the ordinary sense. 5%. The remaining 95% is dark matter and dark energy, the unnamed and the poorly understood, the components of reality that dominate the universe by proportion while remaining, to our instruments and our theories, largely opaque. We live, and have always lived, in a universe whose majority we cannot see. We are the 5% attempting to understand the whole, the way a person might try to understand an ocean by studying a single cup of its water, finding in that cup real truths, genuine chemistry, actual physics, but missing the depth, missing the pressure, missing the cold and the dark and the scale of the thing. And yet the attempt is not futile. The attempt is, in fact, one of the most extraordinary things that has ever happened in this universe, as far as we know. That matter organized itself into minds. That those minds looked outward and began, slowly, imperfectly, with instruments made from the 5%, to ask questions about the 95. There is something almost tender in that image, when you allow yourself to feel it fully. A small arrangement of atoms, temporary and fragile and warm, standing at the edge of an incomprehensible darkness and asking what the darkness is made of. Not fleeing it, not pretending it is not there, but leaning toward it with instruments and mathematics and a quality of attention that is, in its own way, a form of reverence. Science is sometimes described as cold, as clinical, as the opposite of wonder. But that description has always seemed to miss something essential. The scientist who spends a career measuring the rotation curves of galaxies, who notices in the data that the numbers do not add up, that there is more gravity than light can account for, and who follows that discrepancy not with frustration but with deepening curiosity, that person is doing something that feels, from the inside and perhaps from the outside too, remarkably like awe. Vera Rubin was such a person. Working in the 1960s and 70s, she studied the way galaxies rotate, measuring the velocities of stars at different distances from galactic centers, expecting to find what Newtonian mechanics predicted, that stars farther from the center would orbit more slowly, just as the outer planets of our solar system move more slowly than the inner ones. Instead, she found something that did not fit. The outer stars of galaxies were moving too fast. Consistently, across galaxy after galaxy, the rotation curves stayed flat where they should have fallen. The visible matter could not explain it. Something else was there, something massive and invisible and distributed throughout and around the galaxy in a vast halo extending far beyond the visible disk of stars. She was not the only one working on this problem, and the idea had precursors, but her observations made the case with a clarity and a consistency that could not be set aside. The universe contained more than we could see. The darkness had weight. She spent decades on this work, patient and meticulous, returning to her telescopes and her data with a kind of devotion that is not easily explained by ambition alone. And when she spoke about it in later years, what came through was not triumph exactly, though the work was genuinely triumphant, but something quieter. A sense of privilege, of having been permitted to spend a life in close proximity to a genuine mystery. She once said that there is still so much to learn, and that she hoped young people would pursue science not for the answers it might give them, but for the questions it will ask them to hold. That the holding of a good question, held carefully and for a long time, is itself a kind of richness. The dark matter she helped make undeniable remains unknown in its nature. Decades of experiments have searched for it directly. Detectors buried deep underground to shield them from cosmic ray interference, filled with noble gases or semiconductor crystals cooled to fractions of a degree above absolute zero, waiting for a dark matter particle to pass through and leave the faintest trace of its passage. So far, silence. Not the silence of absence necessarily, but the silence of a thing that does not interact in the ways we have been listening for. The parameter space of possible dark matter candidates has been constrained enormously, ruled out over vast territories of mass and interaction strength. But what remains, the space of what is still possible, is still large enough to contain the answer. The search continues, underground and in orbit and in the data from particle colliders, patient and systematic and not yet finished. And there is something in that ongoing search, in the decades of careful listening to an apparently empty darkness, that mirrors something about the human relationship to the void more broadly. We have never been entirely comfortable with emptiness. Across cultures and across centuries, the blank spaces have called to us. The unmapped territories on old charts, the silences in music where something seems to be about to happen, the pauses in conversation that hold more than words could carry. We fill them or we lean into them, and in either case we are responding to them, acknowledging that they have a quality, a presence, an effect on everything around them. The empty space in a painting is not neutral. The rest in a piece of music is not the absence of music, but a part of it. The void in physics is not the absence of physics, but one of its most active and consequential domains. Perhaps this is why the question of why the universe is made mostly of nothing does not resolve into a simple answer and then close. It keeps opening. Each layer of emptiness turns out to contain another layer. Each silence holds a sound beneath it. Each darkness, examined closely, reveals a structure, a motion, a participation in the whole. The quantum vacuum fluctuates. The intergalactic voids push outward. The dark matter halos shape the galaxies they cannot be seen inside. The dark energy fills all of space with a pressure that bends the fate of the cosmos toward an ever-accelerating expansion, toward a future in which the universe grows not quieter but larger, not emptier in its experience but emptier in its proportions, as the galaxies retreat from one another across distances that light itself will eventually no longer be able to cross. And yet, even in that imagined future, even in the cold arithmetic of expansion and retreat, there is something that resists the word empty. Not because the universe fills itself back in, not because the distances shrink or the light returns, but because emptiness, as we have come to understand it, is not the absence of participation. It is a different kind of presence. One that does not announce itself. One that does not need to. Consider the photon that travels for 800 million years before it enters the lens of a telescope somewhere on a small and spinning world. For all that time, it moved through what any casual accounting would call nothing. No atoms. No molecules. No surfaces to reflect from or substances to slow it down. And yet the photon was not alone in any meaningful sense. It moved through a field. It moved through geometry. It moved through the curving consequence of every mass that had ever existed in that region of space, through the residual warmth of a universe still cooling from its first moments, through a medium so subtle that physics had to invent entirely new languages just to begin describing what was happening in it. The photon was embedded, always, in something. The something was simply not the kind of something we are built to notice. This is perhaps the deepest revision that modern cosmology has asked of us. Not just a rethinking of what the universe contains, but a rethinking of what it means for space itself to contain anything at all. For most of human history, emptiness was treated as a stage. The void was the background, passive and inert, against which matter performed its dramas. Stars ignited and collapsed. Planets formed and cracked and cooled. Life appeared in thin films on the surfaces of rocks and looked upward and wondered. And through all of it, space was simply the place where these things happened. Not a participant. Not a medium. Not a thing with properties. That understanding dissolved slowly, across centuries, and then all at once. It dissolved when Newton began to notice that gravity reached across vast distances without any visible mechanism to carry it. It dissolved further when Maxwell described light as a wave moving through fields that could exist in the absence of matter. It cracked open with Einstein, who showed that space and time were not a stage but a fabric, and that the fabric itself could stretch, compress, curve, ripple, and respond. And it shattered completely when quantum mechanics revealed that the vacuum, the truest emptiness physics could construct, was not quiet but seething, not still but alive with the constant creation and annihilation of particle pairs that wink in and out of existence faster than any instrument can directly catch. What remained after all that dissolving was not emptiness. What remained was a universe in which the concept of emptiness had been examined so carefully, so patiently, so rigorously, that it had been found to be something else entirely. A plenum, some have called it. A fullness disguised as absence. A space so thoroughly occupied by fields and fluctuations and geometry and memory that the word nothing no longer quite fits, no longer holds its shape when pressed. And yet the largeness remains. The scale does not soften. If you were to take all of the matter in the observable universe, all of the atoms in every star, every planet, every dust cloud, every drifting molecule in every intergalactic filament, and compress it together without any space between the particles, the result would occupy a volume incomprehensibly smaller than a single grain of sand held between two fingers in the dark. The universe is, by any proportional measure, almost entirely not that. Almost entirely the between. Almost entirely the interval and the distance and the reaching across. And so both things remain true at once, held in a kind of suspension that science does not resolve so much as illuminate from different angles. The universe is full, at the level of fields and quantum geometry and dark energetic pressure spread uniformly through every cubic centimeter of space. And the universe is empty, at the level of matter, of atoms, of the kinds of substance that can be held and weighed and named. These two truths do not cancel one another. They layer. They coexist in the same space, which is to say, in every space, including this one, including the air between these words as you receive them, including the interior of your own body, where the atoms that compose you are themselves mostly the distance between their own components, a private cosmos of intervals nested inside the larger one. You are, in this sense, a local expression of the universe's primary tendency. Mostly space. Mostly interval. Mostly the between, organized into a temporary form that can breathe and wonder and lie still in the dark and listen to words about the nature of the vast. There is something quietly significant in that. Not comforting in the way of easy answers, but in the way of recognition. The universe is not external to what you are made of. It is continuous with it. The same proportions. The same predominance of absence over presence, of field over particle, of distance over contact. When you reach toward the cosmos and find it incomprehensibly sparse, you are in some sense recognizing something that is also true of the very matter you reached with, the hand, the arm, the atoms arranged into fingers that point outward into the dark and find, at every scale, the same patient emptiness looking back. And perhaps that recognition is not a diminishment. Perhaps it is the opposite. To discover that you are built from the same proportions as the cosmos, that the void inside the atom mirrors the void between the galaxies, that the silence inside the nucleus echoes the silence between the superclusters, is not to find yourself small. It is to find yourself rhyming with something immense. A local repetition of a pattern that runs in every direction, at every scale, for as far as any instrument has ever looked and presumably beyond. The universe repeats itself. Not exactly. Not mechanically. but in tendency, in proportion, in the quiet preference it shows again and again for spacing things apart, for leaving more room than it fills, for building its most elaborate structures out of intervals as much as out of matter. The atom is mostly space. The solar system is mostly space. The galaxy is mostly space. The cluster of galaxies is mostly space. The filaments and sheets of the cosmic web, those vast architectures of dark matter and luminous gas that represent the largest structures the universe has assembled in 14 billion years, are themselves separated by voids so enormous that the light crossing them would take hundreds of millions of years to arrive, and would find, upon arriving, very little waiting on the other side. This is the shape of things. Not a densely packed sphere of blazing material, not a solid and reassuring plenitude, but a web, a lace, a foam of interconnected structures suspended in a medium of profound openness. And the foam is not random. The voids are not accidents. They are, in the language of cosmology, the natural outcome of the universe's earliest moments, when quantum fluctuations in the density of the primordial plasma seeded regions of slightly more and slightly less, and gravity, patient and inexorable, spent billions of years amplifying those whispered differences into the grand architecture that now stretches in every direction beyond what any eye, aided or unaided, can fully take in. The voids grew because matter left them. Matter left them because gravity pulled it elsewhere, toward the slight overdensities, the regions where a fractionally stronger tug had begun accumulating more, attracting more, deepening the well until galaxies fell into it and filaments formed along the paths of flow, and the empty regions were left behind, expanding, cooling, growing quieter as the surrounding structure drew away. The voids are, in this sense, the shadows of the structure. They are what remains when everything that could cluster has clustered. They are the spaces between the words of a sentence whose words have all migrated to one side. And yet the voids are not truly empty. Even here, in the most underpopulated regions of the observable universe, there are stray galaxies drifting alone, separated from their nearest neighbors by distances that would take light tens of millions of years to cross. There is the cosmic microwave background, that faint and ancient radiation filling all of space with a nearly uniform warmth, the afterglow of an early universe so dense and hot that the entire observable cosmos fit inside a space smaller than a single star. There are neutrinos, billions of them passing through every surface every second, interacting with almost nothing, leaving almost no trace, and yet present, always present, a ghostly filling for a universe that prefers to keep its matter nearly invisible. There is dark matter, that unnamed and unlit substance that outweighs everything we can see by a ratio of roughly 5:1, distributed in halos and filaments that map the skeleton of the cosmic web without illuminating it, without radiating, without doing anything that our instruments can catch directly, and yet without which the galaxies would not hold together, and the web would not have its shape, and the universe as we observe it simply would not be the universe we observe. And there is dark energy, that strangest and most pervasive of all, filling every cubic centimeter of space with a pressure that does not dilute as the universe expands, that does not weaken with distance or time, that simply persists, uniformly, everywhere, pushing the expansion forward, accelerating it gently and then less gently, ensuring that the voids grow not only because matter has left them, but because space itself continues to generate new distance, new interval, new between, at a rate that over cosmic time will carry most of the universe beyond the reach of any signal we could ever send. This is the trajectory. This is where the emptiness is going. Not toward stillness, not toward equilibrium, not toward some final density that matter and space negotiate into balance, but toward more. More distance. More void. More of the primary substance of which the universe has always been most generously composed. The expansion does not approach a limit. It accelerates. And in that acceleration, in that ongoing preference for more space over more contact, the universe reveals something about its own deepest inclination, its most persistent tendency, the direction it has been moving since the first fraction of the first second of its existence. It has always been moving toward openness. Not away from something, not fleeing any center, not dispersing from a point of origin in the way that debris disperses from an explosion, but expanding in all directions simultaneously, every point moving away from every other point, the space between things generating itself continuously, the distance being produced not by motion through space, but by the growth of space itself, by the quiet and relentless multiplication of interval, the universe not throwing its contents outward but stretching the fabric on which they rest. The way a pattern drawn on the surface of a balloon does not move across the surface as the balloon inflates, but simply finds itself farther from every other part of the pattern, separated by more of the same surface, more of the same between. This distinction matters. It is not a small technical clarification. It changes the nature of what emptiness is in a universe like this one. If the galaxies were simply flying apart through a pre-existing void, then the void would be a container, fixed and indifferent, and the galaxies would be its contents, moving within it. But that is not what is happening. The space between the galaxies is not a container. It is a participant. It grows, has a history. It had a beginning, a moment before which there was no between, no interval, no distance for anything to be separated by. And it will have a continuation, a long and cooling future in which the between accumulates without limit, in which the distances become so vast that the very concept of a shared universe, of a cosmos whose different regions can influence or even observe one another, begins to dissolve. We are alive, all of us, in a cosmologically brief window during which the universe is still readable, still visible in its larger structure. The cosmic microwave background still reaches us. The light of distant galaxies still arrives. The web of filaments and voids can still be mapped, however incompletely, by telescopes that gather photons from across billions of light years. But this window is not permanent. It is not the default state of the universe. It is a phase, a particular moment in a long story, and the story is moving, always, in the direction of greater separation, greater silence, greater distance between the things that remain. In the far future that cosmology describes, the galaxies beyond our local group will have receded beyond the cosmic horizon, carried away not by any force that could be resisted, but by the expansion of the space between us, until their light can no longer reach us no matter how long we wait. The universe will still exist. It will simply exist beyond contact. And what will remain visible from any vantage point will be a local island of matter surrounded by darkness in every direction, a darkness not of absence but of disconnection, of distances so vast that even light, moving at the only speed the universe permits, cannot close them. And then, over timescales that make the current age of the universe seem like the first breath of a very long night, even the local matter will change. Stars will exhaust their fuel. The smaller ones will cool into white dwarfs, then black dwarfs, cold and dark and drifting. The larger ones will collapse, some into neutron stars, some into black holes, objects so dense that the emptiness inside the atom has been crushed out of them entirely, matter pressed past the point where the space between particles can be sustained, until what remains is a different kind of density, one that does not radiate, that does not participate in the ordinary exchanges of energy that we associate with activity and warmth and life. And the black holes themselves will not last forever. Quantum mechanics, in one of its stranger gifts to the future, ensures that even black holes evaporate. Over timescales so long that they require exponents to write and imagination to approach, the black holes will lose mass slowly, radiating it away in the form of Hawking radiation, that faint and theoretical emission that arises at the boundary between quantum uncertainty and gravitational confinement, until nothing remains of what was once the densest object in a galaxy, nothing but a dispersing warmth, a final whisper of energy spreading out into a space that has long since grown too large and too cold for anything we would recognize as structure. This is the heat death. The entropic conclusion. The state toward which the second law of thermodynamics has been nudging the universe since the beginning, when the initial conditions were so improbably ordered, so far from equilibrium, that everything since has been a long and luminous and intricate process of spreading out, of moving from concentrated to diffuse, from hot to cold, from structured to uniform, from the extraordinary improbability of the early universe to the final and stable democracy of maximum entropy, in which energy is distributed so evenly that no gradient remains to drive any process, no difference remains to generate any event, no temperature differential remains to power any engine, biological or mechanical or cosmic. And in that final state, the emptiness will have won, if winning is the right word for an outcome that no one will remain to name. The universe will be almost entirely space, almost entirely the between. The matter that once burned and collided and coalesced into the temporary and magnificent structures of stars and worlds and living things will have dispersed into its most diffuse form, spread across a volume so large that the average density of anything at all will approach zero as closely as any physical quantity can approach a limit without becoming it. But here, now, in this particular phase of the story, the structures still burn. The galaxies still turn. The light still travels. And somewhere in the warm and fragile interval between the explosive beginning and the cooling end, in the narrow and luminous window between ignition and dispersal, something happened that the universe had not, as far as we know, arranged for before. Something looked up. Something became curious. Something developed the capacity not only to exist within the cosmos but to notice it, to measure it, to sit quietly in the dark and wonder about the nature of the space between the stars and find, in that wondering, something that felt like meaning, or at least like the beginning of meaning, like the first syllable of a word whose full pronunciation might take centuries more to complete. That something is rare. We do not know how rare. The universe is large enough that even if the probability of awareness arising on any given world is vanishingly small, the sheer number of worlds might ensure that it arises somewhere, perhaps in many places, perhaps in forms so different from our own that we would not recognize them as awareness at all. Or the conditions might be so specific, so dependent on a particular arrangement of chemistry and temperature and time, that what happened here on this small and spinning world is genuinely singular, a single instance of the cosmos becoming conscious of itself in a universe that is otherwise entirely unaware of its own existence. We do not know, and that not knowing is itself a kind of emptiness, a void at the center of the question of what we are and why we are here to ask it. But it is a void of the kind we have come to recognize, the kind that is not simply absence but potential, not simply silence but the condition in which a question can resonate without being swallowed by noise. And the question does resonate. It has resonated for as long as human beings have been capable of forming it, which is to say for as long as there have been human beings in any meaningful sense. The night sky was the first great teacher of scale, the first instrument for measuring insignificance and then, slowly, for measuring something else. Something harder to name. The ancients who looked upward did not have the vocabulary of cosmology. They did not know about dark matter or quantum vacuums or the accelerating expansion of space. But they felt the scale. They felt the darkness pressing in from every direction. They felt the smallness of the fire they sat beside in relation to the fires above them, and they responded not with silence but with stories, with maps, with calendars, with a long and patient project of making the immensity legible. That project continues. It has not resolved. It may never resolve in any final sense, because the universe continues to expand and the questions expand with it, and every answer opens into a larger space of unknowing that the answer itself makes visible. This is not a failure of inquiry. It is the shape of inquiry when the object of study is genuinely inexhaustible. The universe does not have a bottom. It does not have an edge in the sense that would allow someone to stand at the boundary and say, "Here it ends, here the questions stop, here the emptiness gives way to something else entirely." or if it does have edges, of a kind, they are not accessible. The cosmic horizon, that boundary beyond which the expansion of space has carried regions into permanent disconnection from us, is not a wall but a limit of light, a consequence of the finite speed at which information travels through a universe that is growing faster than that speed can compensate for. Beyond the horizon, the universe continues. We simply cannot know what it contains, cannot receive any signal from it, cannot include it in any map we make. It exists, presumably, in the way that everything we cannot perceive exists, indifferently, without reference to our ability to perceive it. And the unobservable universe may be very large, larger than the observable portion by factors that current models cannot constrain. Some versions of inflationary cosmology suggest that the universe extends far beyond what we can see, that the observable cosmos, with its 2 trillion galaxies and its vast and mostly empty spaces, is a small and perhaps utterly typical region of a much larger whole. Other versions suggest that the larger whole is not merely large but effectively infinite, that the pattern of galaxies and voids and filaments continues without limit in every direction, that somewhere, impossibly far away, every arrangement of matter that is physically possible has been realized, including arrangements identical to this one, including worlds identical to this one, including moments identical to this one. These are not comfortable thoughts. They are not meant to be. They are the kinds of thoughts that the universe generates when it is examined honestly, without the softening of false boundaries or the comfort of easy conclusions. They are the thoughts that arise when you follow the evidence where it leads and find that it leads somewhere much larger and stranger than the familiar world that common experience suggests. And in all of that largeness and strangeness, the emptiness persists as the dominant feature, the primary characteristic, the thing that is most true about the universe at every scale and in every direction. Space, mostly. Interval, mostly. The between, mostly. And within the between, fields and geometry and quantum fluctuation and dark energy and the faint warmth of ancient light, a fullness that does not announce itself, that does not crowd or press or demand attention, but that is there, always there, in every corner of what exists, in every silence that science has ever learned to read. And perhaps that is the most honest summary that can be offered of what the universe is. Not a collection of things, not a catalogue of objects moving through a backdrop, but a geometry of relationship, a fabric of interval, a vast and mostly empty architecture in which the presence of matter is the exception and the presence of nothing is the rule. And not a cold or indifferent nothing, not an absence that signifies failure or incompleteness, but a nothing that participates, that vibrates at scales too small for any instrument to fully resolve, that bends and flexes under the influence of mass and energy, that carries within it the seeds of everything that has ever condensed from its depths. This is what cosmology has learned, slowly, across centuries of careful watching and mathematical listening. That the void is not void. That space is not merely the absence of matter but a medium in its own right, with properties and behaviors and a kind of physics that belongs entirely to it. That the universe did not fill emptiness with matter so much as it arranged matter within a pre-existing geometry that was always, in some fundamental sense, the primary thing. The canvas before the paint. The silence before the note. The interval before the measure. And when you carry that understanding into your body, when you let it settle below the level of thought and become something more like feeling, something shifts. The world does not shrink. It expands. Every surface you have ever touched becomes transparent, becomes mostly interval, mostly the long electromagnetic conversations between particles that never quite make contact. Every solid thing reveals itself as a kind of persistent agreement, a standing wave of probability that has chosen, for this moment, to remain coherent. Every room you have ever sat in becomes a chamber of near-total emptiness, with a thin scattering of atomic architecture distributed through it like islands in an ocean that is almost entirely water and very nearly no land at all. and above that room, the sky, which is itself a kind of nothing, a thin envelope of molecular gas clinging to the surface of a planet that is, in the scale of the solar system, a very small object. And above the sky, the solar system, which is itself mostly empty space between a star and a loose scattering of orbiting bodies separated by distances so large that the light crossing them takes minutes and hours rather than the fractions of a second that seem fast to human experience. And beyond the solar system, the interstellar medium, that thin and ghostly distribution of gas and dust and magnetic field lines and cosmic rays that fills the space between stars with a density so low that any laboratory on Earth capable of achieving it would be celebrated as a near-perfect vacuum. And yet that medium is not nothing. It is seeded with complex molecules, with water and ammonia and carbon compounds and long organic chains that form in the cold dark between stars through chemistry that requires no warmth, no sunlight, no biology. Just time and the slow, patient accumulation of atoms on the surfaces of dust grains, under the influence of ultraviolet light and cosmic ray bombardment, chemistry happening at temperatures close to absolute zero across timescales that dwarf the entire history of life on Earth. The universe is synthesizing complexity even in its emptiest regions. Even where nothing is happening in any conventional sense, something is happening at the molecular level, in the dark, in the cold, without witness. This is one of the stranger and more quietly remarkable things that modern astrochemistry has discovered. That the interstellar medium is not sterile. That it is, in a chemical sense, surprisingly rich. That the building blocks of biology are distributed through the galaxy with something approaching generosity, waiting in cold molecular clouds for the gravitational collapse that will eventually concentrate them into a new solar system, a new planet, a new warm surface where liquid water can pool and the chemistry can accelerate and complexity can climb toward whatever threshold separates the non-living from the living. The emptiness, it turns out, is not empty of potential. It is saturated with it. The nothing is full of precursor, full of ingredient, full of the long, slow preparation for something. And so the question of why the universe is mostly empty begins to transform into something else. It begins to sound less like a lament and more like an observation about process, about the relationship between scale and complexity, about how the universe seems to require vast distances and deep time and enormous volumes of near-nothingness in order to generate, here and there, in the margins, in the thin places where conditions conspire, the intricate and improbable arrangements that we recognize as structure, as chemistry, as life, as thought. The emptiness is not waste. It is not the universe failing to fill itself. It is the universe doing what it does, which is to take almost nothing and arrange it, over incomprehensible time and across incomprehensible distance, into local islands of extraordinary complexity. You are one of those islands. This moment, this breath, this quiet and this darkness around you is one of those islands. And the ocean of emptiness that surrounds it on every side, in every direction, at every scale from the subatomic to the intergalactic, is not the absence of meaning but the context in which meaning, wherever it arises, becomes possible at all. The context in which the rare and the intricate and the briefly coherent can exist without being crushed by its own density, without collapsing under the weight of too much proximity, without dissolving into a uniformity that would leave no room for difference, for gradient, for the slow climb from simple to complex that the universe seems, in its patient and unhurried way, to favor. Because complexity requires contrast. It requires the difference between here and there, between dense and sparse, between warm and cold, between the place where matter has gathered and the vast surrounding quiet where it has not. A universe filled uniformly with matter at every scale would be a universe in thermal equilibrium, a universe where every point is indistinguishable from every other point, where there is no gradient down which energy can flow, no difference across which work can be done, no asymmetry around which structure can organize itself. It would be a universe at maximum entropy, a universe that had already arrived at its final state, a universe in which nothing further could happen because everything had already happened and settled into the last and most featureless configuration that physics allows. The emptiness, then, is not a deficiency. It is the necessary condition for everything that is not empty. It is the reason that stars can burn, because there is cold, dark space for their heat to radiate into. It is the reason that planets can form, because there are vast quiet regions where dust and gas can accumulate without being immediately disrupted. It is the reason that life can exist, because life requires the constant flow of energy from a higher temperature source to a lower temperature sink, and that flow is only possible because the universe has not yet reached the equilibrium that would make such gradients impossible. The sun burns and the earth receives and the darkness of space absorbs, and in that arrangement, in that triangle of warmth and reception and cold dispersal, something as extraordinary as biology becomes thermodynamically possible. And all of it resting on the foundation of the empty. All of it sustained by the vast and patient nothing that surrounds every warm and luminous and living thing in the universe, absorbing the excess, providing the contrast, holding the space open for the next unlikely configuration to try its hand at persisting. There is something in this that quiets a particular kind of anxiety. The anxiety that asks whether the emptiness means something is wrong, whether the universe should have been fuller, warmer, more populated, more immediately hospitable to the things we value. But the emptiness is not a mistake in the architecture. It is the architecture. It is the primary feature around which all secondary features, including warmth and light and chemistry and the slow accretion of complexity, are arranged. Without it, none of those secondary features would be possible. The cold dark is not the enemy of life. It is, in a thermodynamic and structural sense, one of life's most essential preconditions. And the universe has been maintaining that cold dark for a very long time. For nearly 14 billion years, the space between things has been expanding, growing colder, growing more diffuse, the ancient heat of the beginning spreading thinner across a volume that increases faster than the warmth can fill it. The cosmic microwave background, that faint and nearly uniform glow of microwave radiation that permeates all of space in every direction, is the last visible remnant of the time when the universe was small enough and hot enough for light and matter to be in constant intimate contact. Now it is a whisper. A thermal memory distributed across the entire observable universe at a temperature just under 3 degrees above absolute zero, so cold and so diffuse that detecting it at all required instruments of extraordinary sensitivity and decades of patient refinement. That background glow is, in a sense, the sound of the universe breathing out. The long exhalation that began at the moment of recombination, when the expanding cosmos cooled enough for electrons to settle into orbit around nuclei and the universe became, for the first time, transparent to its own light. Before that moment, the universe was opaque, a plasma so dense that photons could not travel freely, scattering endlessly off charged particles in a fog of such brightness and heat that no structure could persist within it. And then the temperature dropped below a threshold, and the plasma cleared, and light traveled freely for the first time, and the universe became the kind of place where distances could exist in the way that we understand distances, where here and there could mean something, where the geometry of space could begin its long, slow work of separating things and making room for what would come next. What came next was darkness. A long, deep, cosmological darkness that astronomers call the cosmic dark ages, a period of hundreds of millions of years after recombination during which the universe cooled and expanded and the first clouds of hydrogen and helium drifted in the dark without yet having collapsed into stars. No light, no warmth except the slowly fading residue of the beginning. Just the quantum fluctuations in the density of matter, the tiny variations seeded in the first fractions of a second of existence, growing slowly under the influence of gravity, pulling matter together in the places where it was slightly denser, leaving it behind in the places where it was slightly less so. The universe sorting itself in the dark, patiently, without witness, arranging the ingredients for everything that would follow across timescales so vast that the human mind can hold the number without ever truly feeling its weight. Hundreds of millions of years of darkness and slow gravitational gathering, of clouds contracting under their own accumulated mass, of temperatures rising at the centers of those contracting clouds until, at last, the threshold was crossed, the pressure and heat sufficient to ignite the fusion that had been waiting patiently in the structure of hydrogen since the first minutes of the universe's existence. And the first stars came on. There is something almost unbearably beautiful about that moment, even considered from the cold distance of cosmology. The universe had been dark for so long, had been arranging itself in silence for so many hundreds of millions of years, and then, in regions scattered across the young cosmos, the darkness broke. Not with fanfare. Not with anything that could be witnessed by any consciousness that existed, because no consciousness yet existed. But with a quiet and enormous fact of fusion, of hydrogen becoming helium in stellar cores, of photons beginning their outward journey through the bodies of the first stars, of light entering a universe that had been without it for longer than the current age of the Earth. Those first stars were nothing like the Sun. They were enormous, many times more massive, burning with a ferocity that their smaller successors could not sustain. They lived fast and died violently, collapsing and exploding in supernovae that seeded the surrounding gas with the heavier elements their cores had forged, the carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and iron that would eventually become the raw material for planets and chemistry and the long experiment of biology. The universe was building its ingredient list in the hearts of dying stars, and the emptiness between those stars was the space across which those ingredients would scatter and mix and eventually find their way into the next generation of stellar systems. And so the emptiness served again. Not as absence, but as distribution medium. The vast spaces between stars allowed the products of stellar nucleosynthesis to spread across the galaxy, to mix with fresh hydrogen, to be incorporated into new molecular clouds, to cycle through generations of star formation and stellar death, each cycle enriching the interstellar medium with a slightly more complex chemistry, each generation of stars leaving behind a slightly more varied legacy for the next. The galaxy as a slow and enormous recycling system, using its emptiness as the medium through which it passed its inheritance forward across time. We are the products of that inheritance. The calcium in bone and the iron in blood and the oxygen drawn in with every breath are the forged remnants of stars that died before the sun existed, scattered through the interstellar medium and eventually gathered into the solar nebula that collapsed to form this system, this planet, this improbable arrangement of chemistry that has spent several billion years becoming increasingly complicated. When the universe is described as being made mostly of nothing, it is worth holding alongside that description the equally true fact that the small fraction that is not nothing has been cycling and complexifying and building on itself for nearly 14 billion years, and that the results of that process include, among other things, the awareness currently receiving these words in the quiet of this moment. That awareness is itself a kind of emptiness in the atomic sense. The neurons that carry thought are themselves mostly space. The electrochemical signals that move through them are the behavior of ions crossing membranes, charge differentials propagating through biological architecture that is, at the subatomic level, the same vast emptiness that characterizes all matter everywhere. Thought is something that emptiness does when it is arranged in a sufficiently complex pattern and provided with a sufficiently steady flow of energy. Consciousness, whatever it ultimately is, arises in a medium that is mostly interval, mostly the distance between things, mostly the between that we have been tracing across every scale from the quantum to the cosmic. This is not a diminishment of consciousness. It is, if anything, a deepening of the mystery. Because the emptiness that thinks, the emptiness that wonders, the emptiness that lies quietly in the dark and allows these ideas to move through it like slow light through a deep medium, is doing something that no other arrangement of emptiness in the known universe has been observed to do. It is turning the universe's attention back upon itself. It is the means by which the cosmos examines its own structure, asks its own questions, feels something in the presence of its own vastness that might, if we are generous with our language, be called awe. And the awe is appropriate. It is the correct response to correct information. The universe is large beyond any comfortable imagining, empty beyond any easy acceptance, old beyond any intuitive grasp, and yet here, in this small and temporary arrangement of matter and energy and electrochemical signaling, it has produced something that can sit with the knowledge of all that emptiness and find it not terrifying but somehow clarifying. Somehow settling. As though the vastness, once accepted rather than resisted, becomes not a source of smallness but a source of a different and quieter kind of belonging. Not the belonging of being central or important or protected, but the belonging of being continuous with something, of being made from the same emptiness and the same ancient stellar material as everything else that exists, of being woven into the same fabric that stretches in every direction without end or edge or boundary that any instrument has yet detected. The fabric that is mostly nothing, and yet holds within its geometry the possibility of everything that has ever organized itself into coherence, into warmth, into the brief and luminous exception to the rule of emptiness that a living world represents. And living worlds, as far as the evidence currently suggests, are rare. Not impossible. Perhaps not even uncommon in the absolute sense, given the scale of what exists. But rare in the sense that the conditions required to produce them are specific and layered and dependent on an accumulation of favorable circumstances that must persist across billions of years without catastrophic interruption. The right distance from the right kind of star. The right planetary mass to hold an atmosphere. The right chemistry in the early oceans. The right balance of geological activity to cycle nutrients and regulate temperature across timescales long enough for complexity to climb from the simple to the elaborate. The right absence of extinction-level disruption during the critical windows when life is establishing its foothold and diversifying its strategies. Each of those requirements is individually achievable. The universe produces the ingredients in abundance. But the simultaneous satisfaction of all of them, maintained across the billions of years that separate the first chemistry from the first thought, is the kind of coincidence that the vastness of the universe makes possible without making common. There may be other places where it has happened, other worlds where the emptiness and the matter and the energy have conspired to produce something that wonders. But we have not found them yet. And in the silence of that not yet finding, there is something that asks to be sat with rather than immediately resolved. Because the silence of the cosmos, the absence of any detected signal from any other intelligence in the universe, is itself a data point. A strange and heavy one. The universe is old enough and large enough that if complex life arose easily and frequently, the evidence of it should, by some calculations, already be apparent. The sky should carry signals. The galaxies should show signs of engineering on astronomical scales. And yet the sky is quiet in the way that the sky has always been quiet, full of the light of stars and the faint background warmth of the beginning, and nothing else. Nothing that speaks of intention. Nothing that announces another arrangement of emptiness that has learned to ask where it came from. This is the Fermi paradox, that old and unresolved tension between the apparent likelihood of life and the apparent absence of its signatures. And it sits at the intersection of everything this narration has been tracing across its long and patient arc. The emptiness, the scale, the rarity of complexity, the brief duration of the conditions that make thought possible. Perhaps the silence is simply a consequence of distance and time, signals traveling at the speed of light through a universe so large that even civilizations that have been broadcasting for millions of years have not yet had their light reach us. Perhaps the silence is a consequence of the very emptiness we have been examining, the vast separations between stellar systems ensuring that even the most persistent signals diffuse and weaken before they can bridge the interval. Or perhaps the silence speaks to something about the nature of complexity itself. About how rare and fragile and temporary the conditions for it truly are. About how the universe, for all its age and scale, may produce awareness in only the most exceptional of circumstances, in only the thinnest margins of its vast and mostly featureless expanse. And if that is true, then the awareness that exists here, now, in this moment, in this quiet room, carries a weight and a significance that the emptiness surrounding it cannot diminish but only, in its contrast, deepen. The deepening happens slowly. It happens the way that the eyes adjust to darkness, gradually becoming sensitive to light that was always there but not yet perceptible. The adjustment to the true scale and nature of the universe is something like that. A slow increase in sensitivity to what the evidence is actually saying, to what the numbers are actually describing, to what the silence and the emptiness and the distances are actually communicating to any mind willing to receive them without insisting on a more comfortable translation. What they communicate is this: that existence, in the form of organized complexity, in the form of chemistry that sustains itself, in the form of biology that reproduces and evolves, in the form of neurology that models the world and asks questions about it, is not the default state of the universe. It is not what happens when nothing intervenes. It is, rather, what happens when an extraordinary sequence of favorable conditions accumulates and persists long enough for matter to climb the long staircase from hydrogen to thought. And that staircase is surrounded on every side by the empty, by the vast and patient nothing that does not climb, that does not organize, that simply persists in its geometry and its quantum fluctuation and its slow expansion, indifferent to whether the rare and fragile islands of complexity within it continue or dissolve back into the diffuse. The indifference is real. It should not be softened. The universe does not tend toward life. It does not protect the complex or preserve the aware or ensure the continuation of anything that has managed to arise within it. It expands regardless. It cools regardless. Its stars burn through their fuel on schedules that acknowledge no exceptions and grant no extensions. The galaxy rotates on timescales that reduce the entire history of civilization to something less than a single heartbeat in the life of the cosmos. And yet, within that indifference, within that vast and unattending expanse, something attended. Something noticed. Something took the measure of the emptiness and held it, if only briefly, in the light of its own awareness. That is what is happening right now. In this room, in this quiet, in this particular arrangement of atoms that has spent billions of years becoming capable of receiving these ideas, the universe is attending to itself. Not through any grand mechanism. Not through any process that required intention or design. But through the simple and staggering fact that matter, given enough time and the right conditions, arranges itself into configurations that can reflect, that can receive information about the whole from within the part, that can lie in the dark and contemplate the dark and find in that contemplation something that feels, however provisionally, like meaning. The meaning is not written into the emptiness. It does not arrive from outside. It is not a property of space or time or the quantum fields that fill the vacuum with their ceaseless subtle activity. It is something that arises only at the level of the aware, only in the brief and extraordinary intervals when the universe has organized itself into something capable of valuing its own existence. And because it arises there, it is real, not eternal, not guaranteed. Not protected from the entropy that will eventually dissolve every structure that complexity has ever managed to build. But real in the way that anything is real, present in the moment of its occurrence, sufficient to itself, requiring no permanence to justify its existence. This is perhaps the quietest and most important thing that the contemplation of cosmic emptiness can offer. Not comfort in the conventional sense. Not the reassurance that things will be fine or that consciousness persists beyond the body or that the universe has a purpose that includes you in its accounting. But something more honest and more durable than those reassurances. The recognition that the awareness which finds the emptiness overwhelming is itself the most remarkable thing the emptiness has produced. That the smallness which the scale of the universe seems to impose is offset, not entirely but meaningfully, by the depth and complexity of the inner space that awareness opens within itself. that the universe may be vast and mostly nothing, but that the experience of the vast and mostly nothing, the capacity to receive it and be moved by it and lie quietly in the dark with the full weight of it resting somewhere in the chest, is not a small thing. It is, by any measure available to us, an extraordinary thing. And so we return, at the end of this long and patient journey through the scales of emptiness, to the place where we began, to the ordinary darkness of a room, to the body resting in it, to the breath moving slowly through a chest that is mostly empty space, sustaining a brain that is mostly interval, dreaming in a world that is mostly distance, orbiting a star that is mostly plasma and gravity and the slow consumption of hydrogen, turning in a galaxy that is mostly the dark matter and dark energy that science has detected but not yet fully named, suspended in a universe that is mostly the echo of its own beginning, expanding into a future that grows larger and emptier with every second that passes. All of that is true. All of that is what the evidence says, carefully gathered and honestly interpreted across centuries of human inquiry. And all of it is present in this moment, not as abstraction, not as something happening elsewhere to other things, but as the actual nature of the reality in which this breath is being drawn and this darkness is being inhabited and these words are arriving and then dissolving into whatever comes after words when the mind is slow and the night is deep and the distance between one thought and the next grows long and peaceful. The emptiness is not something to be crossed or filled or solved. It is something to be inhabited, the way that a note inhabits silence, the way that light inhabits darkness without eliminating it, the way that a life inhabits the vast and mostly featureless universe without being diminished by its scale. You are here, in all of this, made of it, continuous with it. The same quantum fields that fill the vacuum between galaxies also fill the space between your atoms. The same geometry that curves around the mass of stars also curves, infinitesimally, around you. The same expansion that carries galaxies apart from one another also carries every moment away from the last, into the open and unknowable distance of what has not yet happened. And in that distance, in that open and patient and mostly empty future, the universe continues, cooling slowly, expanding steadily, its stars burning through their remaining fuel across timescales so vast that they make the current age of the cosmos seem like a brief and luminous introduction. Its emptiness deepening, its matter thinning, its islands of complexity persisting for as long as the conditions that make them possible hold together. And here, in the narrow and precious window of those conditions, in the warm and temporary exception to the rule of cold and empty and dark, you rest. The universe rests in you. The emptiness holds you the way it holds everything, which is to say completely, which is to say without effort, which is to say the way that space holds all things that exist within it. Gently, without preference, without end.